He's dedicated his life to protecting the right of parents to educate their children, to training young people to be engaged citizens, and to protecting your right to talk about and live by your faith. I'm Stuart Shepard, and this is First Liberty Live. You can tell we're not in our usual digs here. We are here at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. It's Christian media of all kinds, from TV to radio to streaming. A lot of our friends from all across the country gathered together here. It's in the Dallas area, so we thought we'll just drive down the road and be part of this. I got my old friend Mike Farris here. He is the founding president. I'm going to go through a bit of your bio. Okay. Founding president of Homeschool Legal Defense Association. We homeschooled. We were members of HSLDA. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. It's glad that we had that in common.
We got a lot of helpful information and guidance from there. He's also the founding president of Patrick Henry College in Percival, Virginia. And he served as president and CEO for several years for our friends over at Alliance Defending Freedom. And at the moment, he's general counsel for NRB. You've been a busy guy.
I have, but keep in mind that all took about 45 years, so wasn't all compressed. So yeah.
You've been at this for a long time and seen it from a lot of different angles. As you look at the state of religious freedom in the United States today, where are we? What's your assessment?
Well, it's kind of there's two trends. There's a really good trend going on. There's a lot of improvements. The Supreme Court's made some improvements, especially on the Establishment Clause side of the House. Free exercise, there's still a lot of work to do. I was the co-chairman of the group that wrote the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, lawyers there that got that done in the early 90s. On the free exercise, there's still a long way to go. We need to get rid of the Smith case, but there are good signs there that evil empire is starting to crumble a bit, but the biggest thing is that when I started doing this kind of work full-time in 1980, there were 3 lawyers in America doing this full-time.
Wow.
John Whitehead, me, and William Ball. That was it. Now there are some great teams. First Liberty, great team. ADF's a great team. Liberty Counsel, we have a great team. We're still tiny compared to the ACLUs and others, so everybody listening to this needs to double all their donations to all the Christian legal organizations, because we need to get bigger than the ACLU. But the fact that there's so many of us on the field today is such a change from where we were 40 years ago.
And thank you for the endorsement and for the encouragement for people to support us, because we're a nonprofit, it's what we do. I want to get down into the detail just a little bit more to help regular people like me understand the changes that we've seen, say, over the last 20 years in the law. How are courts looking differently at religious freedom cases now than they were a decade or two ago?
Well, there's a Supreme Court decision from 1990 called Employment Division versus Smith that was terrible. And it caused the Religious Freedom Restoration Act to be necessary. And to give people just an insight into that, Hobby Lobby won their religious freedom case in the Supreme Court, but not on the First Amendment, but on the Religious Freedom Restoration Act. They should have been able to win on the First Amendment, but the Smith decision took that away. And what that case said was, you can't get a religious exemption from a neutral general law. And what that means, for example, neutral general law is no sex discrimination in employment. That wasn't aimed at religion, so it's a neutral general law. My church won't hire a woman pastor.
Right.
And so we're in violation of a neutral general law. Patrick Henry College would not ever hire an LGBT person to be a professor, anything for that matter, nothing. Everybody who works at Patrick Henry has to share our statement of faith in total. And so the ability of Christian organizations to hire people that represent their views is under attack. I mean, I filed briefs in the last couple of weeks, amicus briefs, for the Union Gospel Mission in Yakima, Washington. And the state of Washington says, no, the Union Gospel Mission can't restrict its hiring of staff to Christians. I mean, they serve everybody, everybody. But they staff to share the gospel of Christ. They want them all to be believers. And so that principle is under attack, and the Smith decision says, well, it's a neutral general law. Tough beans for you that you only want to hire Christians. That's the kind of thing that's going on, and so we're moving in a better direction there, but there is a long way to go, and we're hoping that the current Supreme Court will take one of these cases and actually get rid of that old case, and we should be back on strong First Amendment grounds on all that area of activity.
Along the way, you wrote a book about the significance of faith and the crafting of the Bill of Rights.
Yes.
As someone who's studied this, we often reference the fact that the founders put the free exercise of religion as part of the First Amendment for a reason. Help us understand the backstory of that. Why did they do it that way?
Well, there were two sides of the political landscape when we were adopting the Constitution. The Federalists, led by James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, didn't think we needed a Bill of Rights because the government we were creating was so limited, it wouldn't have any jurisdiction over all these things. Patrick Henry and the Anti-Federalists said, tough, we don't trust that, we want to have a Bill of Rights, including religious freedom. Well, Madison was running for the first Congress in Virginia, and in order to win, he knew he needed the votes of Baptist pastors. He was running against James Monroe. It was very close elections, as it turned out. And he had been a great guy on religious freedom when he was in the General Assembly of Virginia. He was one of their best friends of the Baptists. But the Baptists came to him and said, you want our votes? Give us a Bill of Rights. Promise us a Bill of Rights. And so Madison flipped his view. He promised him the Bill of Rights, and he kept his word. When he went to Congress, Congress was saying, no, we got a lot of others, we got to start the country, we got all this stuff to do. There's not an acute issue here. Madison said, no, we got to get this right from the beginning. He gave us the Bill of Rights, and he pushed it through, and of course the states ratified it. And it was because those Baptist pastors violated the Johnson Amendment, if it had been in place at the time,
right.
And in church endorsed James Madison, and therefore we have the Bill of Rights. Had nothing to do with the Enlightenment, then or along the way. It was people of faith who were willing to sacrifice their lives for the freedom to worship God. They were the ones that brought religious freedom to us, not the Enlightenment. It had virtually nothing to do with it.
Put into context for us why the free exercise of religion and keeping government out of religion is necessary for a prospering culture, for a good civil culture?
Well, the reason that the Baptists and others in those days believed in religious freedom is key to that answer. And that is, government has no jurisdiction over the heart, soul, and mind of man. God alone has jurisdiction over the heart, soul, and mind of man. And so if you take that position, government has no jurisdiction over my religion or your religion or anybody's religion. And that understanding of a limitation on the power of government and the non-limitation on the power of God is essential to all freedom. If we don't get that right, God's the author of freedom, government is limited, it can do only those things that it's given the power from the people, enumerated powers doctrine, all of those principles. The other principle that's embedded in our Constitution, deeply Christian principle, is everybody's a sinner. You can't trust anybody with too much power. So from that we get separation of powers, checks and balances, federalism, the rule of enumerated powers. All those things say, you're a sinner, we're not going to trust you with too much power, you're going to do this, and we're going to check you 46 different ways. So those are the principles, and that's why if you like freedom, you need to embrace those God-centered principles.
People on the left like to say, oh, this was written by people hundreds of years ago. They can't understand today's culture. But the principles you just talked about, that was really well put, are still true. I mean, we're still living with that.
Right. I've done a fair number of Fourth Amendment cases, search and seizure cases, defending homeschoolers, social workers knocking on the door. I ended up doing a lot of Fourth Amendment work. And in Fourth Amendment, it says it protects our papers and things. And so the papers, well, our computer records aren't paper literally,
yeah.
But the principles are exactly the same. New facts, computers are new facts, but they're old principles. And the old principles are the government can't get your documents unless they have a valid warrant or probable cause plus an emergency. That's called the exigent circumstances doctrine, or your consent. Other than they can't come in. They can't come in your house. They can't come into your business. They can't come into your documents. And new facts, old principles. And so, yeah, there's new facts, but the old principles are still valid, and they're the ones that made America great and will continue to make America great.
This last question, I'm thinking about any young people that might be watching this interview. You're a gifted attorney. You have a very impressive resume. You could have gone a lot of different directions with your career, but you've chosen to do this kind of work primarily in the nonprofit sector. Why is that? Why is your heart in this?
Well, my dad was a public school principal, and he wanted me to become a lawyer to fight against the ACLU for school districts. But by the time I got done with law school, most school districts and the ACLU were on the same side. And so I was drawn into fighting for the freedom to give people a godly education. That was my initial call. And I understood over time that there were broader principles that I also needed to endorse. But godly education and that freedom has been, in terms of just years, I've devoted more years to that than any other particular thing. Yeah. It's really listening to the call of God, the advice of my godly dad, and the encouragement of my wife along the years. So, I just feel like, what else would I do? I mean, this is the best job I could possibly have, is to defend the principles I want to defend for the people that I really believe in. I'm not a lawyer for hire. I'm a lawyer who gets to fight for the things I absolutely believe in my heart. And frankly, that's the best lawyer you can ever have, somebody who believes in your cause, actually believes it deeply. And so that's why the groups like First Liberty and ADF and the others are so important, because the lawyers there, they all believe what they're fighting for deeply.
Glad you're on our side. Mike Farris, great talking to you.
Thank you so much. Keep up the good work.
All right. If you'd like to support the work of First Liberty, you can go to firstliberty.org. Just look for the big red Give button up at the top of the page. First Liberty is fighting for what matters.